Welcome back, Defenders. Today on the Jake Broe Show, we are joined by DW Phillips. He is a filmmaker, constitutional attorney, and a journalist. He is the director of Ukraine Story, a foundation dedicated to filmmaking, documentary reporting, and journalism. DW, it's fantastic to meet you. I didn't know your work prior to you reaching out to me, asking to come on the channel. How are you doing today?
Jake, I'm happy today. You may not know me, but we know you, and we're super grateful for you. So good to be with you today.
So you have a new docuseries out called Kyiv of Mine, and I'm actually going to do something I've never done before, but I'm going to play the teaser trailer. So we're going to splice this in, and I want my audience to see a taste of what you've been working on.
First of all, we don't say they Ukraine. We are Ukraine.
Often people say that Ukraine, it's like Russia.
Ukraine? Is it a separate country? You're not part of Russia?
Despite the fact that Moscow would like to call us younger brothers, everything started from here, from Kyiv.
There's a Wild West element to it that reminds me of New York City in the 1980s.
When people from other countries come here and say, you have a fun country, we say, oh, really? You think so?
I came to Ukraine 4 years ago. I opened 4 restaurants.
I hope that my art will introduce Ukraine all around the world.
The first computer in Europe was built in Ukraine. The largest plane in the world is Ukrainian. The most efficient rocket in the world, Ukrainian.
We are a new generation, and it's our choice not to live the same way as our parents did.
It's still a Soviet mentality. The older generation cannot really teach them and mentor them.
Young people, they want to create something new.
We became less afraid of the future. Kyiv is safer than Chicago or New York. Kyiv is safer than London.
Are you feeling optimistic about the future?
Yes, definitely.
On Wednesday, people just set up their alarm clock for Thursday to go to work.
I was not believing it. It cannot be true. And then my husband woke me up. He was bombed.
5 a.m. My boyfriend and I woke up from sound of the first missiles.
I don't know, maybe there are some rules that countries should make some announcement. We are invading your country. Be ready. But it was out from nowhere.
You know, it is the biggest secret for all of Ukrainians. We don't understand for what is this war.
We're basically fighting a pure definition of evil.
So it's summer 2023, and all of us got used to living the life as it is.
Of course, when I'm hearing it, I feel scared. But it's for a few seconds, because I know what I need to do. In 5 minutes, we need to be in a safe place, but the life is still continue.
Initially, you're afraid. Then you're just, well, all right, another missile attack. But on the other hand, fuck it, I need to live my life. All of us are tired of being on adrenaline all the time.
You have to understand that it's a new life. There is no return to old life. And of course, I miss the old one.
It's strange because a lot of our people dying every day. But I feel life in the air.
The country is still at war, but you actually don't see it in the small moments. What you see is people living.
I got engaged.
People stopped thinking maybe we'll do it tomorrow. No, we do it today.
People have changed here, helping each other.
Ukrainian identity solidified over the last year and a half.
We became more kind, much more helpful.
The world got to know Ukraine, but also Ukrainians got to know Ukraine.
That was the trailer for Kyiv of Mine. I'm going to put the link to his docuseries down below. You can watch the first 3 parts here on YouTube. I'll put the link to the entire playlist. I also recommend you like, comment, share the videos, and subscribe to the channel. I do believe there's going to be additional parts coming out whenever they're ready. But DW, thank you so much once again for joining the channel. And I'm going to start by asking, what were you hoping to accomplish with this extensive docuseries? You've been doing this now, I think you said 8 years?
Well, here's the background on the story. I have personally been filming in Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The team that began, which I have joined, the team that began filming Kyiv of Mine started 8 years ago. And as a filmmaker, I've got to tell you, it's a completely unusual type of a circumstance, because when the film began, it was a group of directors and producers from around the world, internationals who had come to Ukraine. They fell in love with Ukraine. They loved the people. And back in those days, going back to 2018, Kyiv was this bustling, exciting, vibrant city full of life. It was a place of cultural innovation. I mean, I think it was on its way to being one of the great, exciting cities of the world. And so the team said, we need to let the world know about this. One of the problems, Jake, I know you're very aware of, is that Russian propaganda is so insidious. It isn't merely that they're giving false information constantly about Ukraine and about the war. What they're trying to do is to influence Americans in the West to think of Ukraine as some sort of a backwoods Borat nation. It is anything but that. Kyiv is, and all of Ukraine is very, very vibrant, very, very alive. And the filmmakers said that the original team said, we got to tell people about that. We need to crush this entire perspective, and we're just going to do it in a way which is exciting, which is interesting. So they began filming, and they followed the story. We tracked with just over a dozen Ukrainians, different people, artists, innovators, tech people, people from every different branch of life. And we thought that what we were going to be doing was telling how beautiful Kyiv is and how exciting it is. And of course we did that. What we never anticipated was a pandemic. What we never anticipated was a full-scale invasion. And so what makes this film series that we put together so exciting and different, completely unique, is that we're walking with people in real time for 8 years, filming them as events are happening. So here's life before the invasion. Boom, here's the day of the invasion. Here's a week after the invasion. Here's, a year after that, which allows us to watch people grow up, watch them get married, watch them have babies, watch them suffer, watch them persevere. It's extraordinary. I don't believe there's any film series that has been able to do that, and we're just fortunate we were there to capture all of that.
So I am curious, once again, you started this docuseries in 2018. What
Correct.
Was your, I understand you got there and you didn't find what you were expecting. You found a vibrant tech leading city, which was surprising, but what was your original intention when you started the series back in 2018?
The intention of this, of the group, the international filmmakers who came together, was to give the world a new conversation on Ukraine, to allow them to see where Ukraine was growing, was prospering, why it really needed to be accepted as a great new part of the West, of the European community, the Western community. We all fell in love with Ukraine. We wanted people to fall in love. It was a love letter. It started off as a love letter. And that was originally the hope. Then it became a journey. Then it became a conversation about something far bigger than anything that anybody expected was going to happen. And here we are today.
So 2018, I don't think the timing is coincidence that this change was occurring, because the Maidan revolution was in 2014. Yep. You yourself did mention this in the docuseries, but you said that things were improving for young people, more opportunities, less corruption in the police force, better hospital and healthcare. So this city that you met in 2018 would have been very different if Viktor Yanukovych had never been deposed, if he had stayed in power. So can you just talk about potentially what changed in those 4 years, potentially, between the Maidan revolution? I understand there was still fighting in the Donbass region. Crimea had been taken. But there was this hope and optimism in the capital city that they would be closer to the West and more prosperous and free.
In the series, you're going to see some conversations about the Revolution of Dignity and about Maidan. I've personally, beyond what you're going to see in the film series itself, I've been with many people who were there, who participated in Maidan. I've interviewed them. And there is, amongst Ukrainians, a universal sense of incredible pride about what happened there. This American narrative that Tucker Carlson and other people put out about a State Department flunky named Victoria Nuland overthrowing all of Ukraine, it's so fantastical. It's so completely false and out of touch with reality. Because what happened was millions of people gathered and they said, we want to break free from the shackles of the old Soviet worldview. Maidan was a bookmark between corruption and the future of Ukraine, which is going to be moving away from corruption, moving towards democracy, moving towards freedom. And it was a revolution of young people as well as old people. Young people were killed. They were the ones that were targeted by Yanukovych's guns and by the others that were there. So as Ukraine moved away from that, even in the face of what was happening in the Donbass and Crimea, Ukrainians developed a sense of identity. We are our own people. We are going to have a great culture. We are building for democracy. We want to be part of Europe. We want our children to grow up in freedom. Our parents did not grow up in freedom. Our children are going to grow up in freedom. So in 2018, 4 years after Maidan, after the Revolution of Dignity, as we're talking to people, and you can see this in Kyiv of Mine, they're saying, we're so excited about the future. We think Ukraine is where it's at. Ukraine is what's happening, and we're going to be moving Ukraine into a new world. So you're very much right. A lot had happened. Of course, by 2019, you have a brand new type of politician who's now the president of Ukraine. A lot has happened. A lot has changed. But if you were to really look at one thing, I would say it was optimism. There is tremendous optimism when you break from the shackles of the old Soviet mentality, which was still dominating in Ukraine in the 1990s.
You mentioned the Borat-like comparison, and I'm going to admit that I'm guilty. Prior to 2022, what did I personally, as an American, know about Ukraine? And not much. I knew the capital city was Kyiv, and I knew that it was a former Soviet republic. But beyond that, I didn't know much about the people, the culture, the geography, the history, and it wasn't difficult for me to basically fall in love with these people and their resilience, which is why I've committed now so much of my life to advocating for and defending Ukraine. So can you talk about why is it important to overcome these humanizing stereotypes? And I understand Borat was Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan also hates those stereotypes. But
yes, they do.
If you can talk about that and what is being accomplished to raise awareness in Western minds about how Ukraine is not, this just a former Soviet satellite?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to tell you a personal story that just shows you the contrast between the reality of Borat-like living in Russia versus the modern world in Ukraine. One of my board members was in Bucha 2 days after the Russians withdrew. He was part of the cleanup team that were helping the survivors and were documenting Russian atrocities. And when we got together after the time, and then I went back and I filmed in Bucha myself, but when we got to talk about it, he was bringing to life this reality to us that these Russian divisions were coming in and walking away with washer machines. They were stealing Game Boys and whatever they could take because that was not part of their life or their experience. Their reality was far closer to not a Muscovite life, but a far more closer to a Borat-type life. Perhaps even that's unfair. But when you present people as living in the 16th century, when they're actually innovators of the 21st century, Ukraine, leading tech revolution, largest plane in the world from Ukraine, over and over again, you begin to list out what Ukrainians have accomplished, how they're leading the way. It's frankly shocking to Americans. It's a much smaller country than America, but they do so much with what they have. It's another reason why the Borat-like philosophy led a lot of Americans to say, there's no way that Ukraine can stand up against Russia, let alone beat Russia. Nearly 4 years into this war, guess what? Russia has absolutely failed in their objectives, and Ukraine has proven innovation over and over and over again. So when Americans, and I'm talking, Jake, I'm talking my own family members, my friends who thought of Ukraine, and maybe some still do, as this sort of 16th century, 14th century reality. it's beyond their capability when they're thinking that way to think, no, these are distinguished, innovative, brilliant, hardworking, passionate, successful warriors and future leaders. It's another attack is they go against the democracy. They think it's some sort of this ancient, anti-democratic kind of a world when it is anything but that. And by the way, we got a great taste of the power of Ukrainian democracy this summer with the student revolution in Kyiv, or protest, I would say, dealing with various concerns they had with what the government was doing. So every time we tear down this false thinking about a Borat-like world, we're allowing Americans and Brits and Belgians and people from all over Europe to think in terms of Ukrainians as their peers, as real human people in a real world that are fighting for their freedom, as opposed to some ancient feudal society.
I don't think we've stated this yet, but you are American. You're talking to me today from Texas.
That's right.
And I assume that almost everybody on the docuseries team, they're also international. So can you touch on why it's important for people outside of Ukraine to go to Ukraine, document as much as they can, and get these stories out?
Oh, I'm so glad for this question. One of the leaders of this tremendous series, Kyiv of Mine, is my friend Ronnie Apteker, who is just a beautiful man. He's a wonderful person. He's South African. He's not Ukrainian. He's one of the guys that came to Ukraine and fell in love. Other people came. They fell in love and they became friends, and they started talking to each other and saying, the world doesn't understand what's going on here. We need to let them know. Why is it so important? I think it's very important because when Ukrainians speak, and I'm sorry to say this, Americans do not give them enough attention. And that's a problem. I don't like that. Americans need to hear from people all around the world, especially Americans. That's one reason why your show, Jake, is absolutely vital, why we need it so badly. And why, for example, I recommend to people, you want to have a condensed answer to a question, what happened at Maidan? Watch this show that Jake has put out. Here's your answer. Give it to your American friends. Let them see it, because they'll listen to Americans. They'll listen to some Europeans, but Americans need to hear from other Americans about Ukraine. The presentation has been, if you support Ukraine, you're just some sort of a leftist, liberal, European, or you're Ukrainian corrupt politician. That's the biggest lie in the world. There are millions of Americans who support Ukraine with all of their heart. They just need to be given voice to the message. That's what you and I try to do, whether through film and documentaries or journalism reports or podcast broadcasts, and we have to be relentless doing this.
Being relentless, I'm doing my best with that. So let's talk about Russian propaganda. Why has it been so successful? How has it been able to permeate American mass media and a lot of American social influencers, people mostly on the right, but why does Russian propaganda, even 3.5 years into this war, continue to succeed? People still mentioning Kyiv is full of Nazis and biolabs and just the most obviously debunked and false information, but it still perpetuates somehow.
Jake, I'm going to take you back in time to when I was about 20 years old, and I was in sub-Saharan Africa dealing with Soviet disinformation, propaganda. As the Soviet Union was trying to spread its influence there, I was in the jungles of Angola, sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Namibia, and other places working there. This was at the very end of the Reagan administration. And during those days, there was within America a real sense of interest and specification. And when it came to understanding the nature of Russian disinformation campaigns, we had been through the Cold War. We understood how the KGB operated. We understood how they would try to fracture Americans and send information to turn us against one another and embed false thinking within different political groups. Since that time, however, the world has changed dramatically. And I think you see one of the greatest betrayals on the right. I'm going to call them the woke right, the Tucker Carlson right, the Candace Owens right, a comprehensive betrayal of the position of their fathers and their mothers who fought so very, very hard, whether it was through the Second World War or the Cold War, all the way up to the present. And Jake, I'm getting to your answer, but I want to point out This is the 80th anniversary of the Second World War. I've made a bunch of TV series on World War II. I've interviewed hundreds of World War II veterans. I filmed all over the world on the Second World War. And my heart is breaking because American students are growing up today watching Tucker Carlson, watching people on the right, and believing that America was the bad guy in World War II, that Churchill was the bad guy in World War II, which is absolutely incredible. And one of the reasons why they're so emphatic about this is because they understand the parallels between what happened in the Second World War and what's happening with Putin are so very, very close. They're so synchronous in so many different ways that the way they are annihilating it is to just say, well, World War II was bad. It was the establishment. It was the military-industrial complex. America shouldn't have been in there. Churchill was a bad guy. Okay, we're not supporting the Nazis, but they're not as bad as we said they were, and all sorts of horror stories which show a fundamental revisionism. Now let's fast forward to where we are today and get straight to the matter. For whatever reason, the American woke right conservative Republican branch of the political institutions has determined that they will base their philosophy on reactionism. We don't like Biden. Therefore, whoever Biden likes is our enemy. We don't like this particular policy. Therefore, any policy that Biden had is going to be the enemy. And somewhere along the line, the conspiratorialists, and I'm picking on Carlson today because he's easy to pick on, but conspiratorialists like Carlson and others came along and they decided that they were going to paint Russia as the great savior of Western tradition and Christianity and things like that. And of course, it was the biggest lie imaginable. And the Russians understand this. There are a lot of Ukrainian friends of mine who believe that these guys must all be working in on the payroll of the Kremlin. They don't have to be on the payroll of the Kremlin. They are political activists who are taking advantage of circumstances and twisting it to their benefit. It serves their benefit to promote Kremlin propaganda. And that's what they've been doing. And they've been poisoning the American mind to the place where, as a nation, instead of projecting liberty and freedom as an objective of the United States of America, we are siding with autocrats. We're literally turning against our friends, and we're giving out the red carpet to war criminals. It's one of the most unconscionable moments in American foreign policy history. And I don't care who you are, Republican, Democrat, left or right, you should be appalled at what's happening. Now, bring that to our movie, Kyiv of Mine, and what we're trying to do. This is not, we deal with the politics, we deal with the history, we deal with all of that. And when you watch a Kyiv of Mine, you're going to see it's done in a very sympathetic manner. It's not a partisan approach. It's just a very honest, from the heart of the people that are going through the experiences, looking out of their window as their homes are being bombed, talking about what happened to my fancy restaurant that I just built, and what does this mean for me as a person. And so it's very, very personal. It's very real. And let me tell you, there is not one Ukrainian that buys, unless they're working for Russia, there's no Ukrainian majority in any way, shape, or form that believes any Russian disinformation. They know it's all a bunch of lies. They know how Russia operates. But sadly, the American people are very much influenced by our leadership. Our leadership has become a mouthpiece, tragically, for the very worst forms of Russian disinformation. And you know what? We could talk about this for 3 shows and barely scratch the surface, because essentially it's what you and I are fighting against. It's like Bucha. We go into Bucha, we see the dead bodies on the ground. The very next day, Lavrov is telling us, well, this was all fake camera work. This was all set up. And that's what's repeated on American right-wing social media podcasting. It's horrible.
Or that pregnant woman at the children's hospital in Mariupol the first couple of weeks, they just said she was a crisis actor. And then she ended up being deported to Russia and has been used in Russian propaganda since then.
That's right.
So it does feel like Trump's election in 2024 was this inflection point.
Yeah.
And the current landscape we're in 2025, we're in uncharted territory. There are no rules anymore. The stability we had over the last 80 years with the founding of the United Nations, the UN Charter, which was a revolutionary document. It was so utopian.
Yeah.
And then the Bretton Woods agreements based on free trade. Nations that trade together shouldn't go to war together. We need to end this competing empires, economic systems that had dominated the world for 500 years.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is, how have we forgotten the lessons of World War II? Is it simply that generation has died off? You know, they're close to 100 or older by now, those who remain. Have we just forgotten what it was like before 1945? And I do believe that what the right does, what people like Tucker Carlson does, is they try to convince you the last 80 years weren't that good, that the stability and peace that we've had, because this has been the most peaceful period in human history going back 10,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't that good. You know, what did you really gain over the last 80 years? Never mind global capitalism and GDP and standard of living. Like they just want you to forget all that and think about how much more you would have if we just started invading our neighbors. If the United States annexed Canada, annexed Greenland, took Cuba, Venezuela, Panama, whatever Trump wants. So how did we forget the lessons of World War II, and how are we backsliding back into an age of empires?
The lessons of World War II are one of the most important bookmarks in history. The sacrifice for freedom of our World War II fathers and mothers was largely unparalleled in the history of the United States. We've been through a lot, but World War II was something really different. And rather than being the sort of a one-off, or rather than being, you know, sort of a new revelation, all the best principles and rules, actually going back, I'm also a constitutional attorney who's taught legal history, and I can tell you that principles of just war, while not followed often and while disregarded, date back centuries, even millennia. And after we saw what took place with the Third Reich, the world came together and said, we're done. We're absolutely done. We can never go back to this again. So we're going to agree to certain things. We're going to agree to what is the nature of warfare, what is just war, what is unjust war, what is unacceptable, and we're going to agree to nations that this will end. And it is a fact that even though America and other nations have made many mistakes, we have not always been consistent. We have sometimes advanced policies which are problematic, and we look back now and say, why did we do that? That was a mistake. All that being said, all that being acknowledged, it was not until Vladimir Putin advanced his full-scale invasion, which took place on February 24th, that we saw something at the World War II scale that took place back in World War II by a sovereign world-leading nation, a war crime of that level. So the war crime we're experiencing right now, and the initial movement into Ukraine has been a war crime, Crimea was a war crime, the East was a war crime, but the full-scale invasion has opened up a Pandora's box of war crimes unlike anything we've seen before. And World War II said we're never going to do that again. We're done with that. We're not going to allow the raping and murdering of little boys and little girls. We're not going to allow Russia to open up green corridors and then just mow down every man, woman, and child that happens to be there, which is exactly what they did in Bucha and other places. We're not going to allow targeting of civilians because non-combatants shouldn't be the subject of warfare. We're not going to allow torture of prisoners anymore. All of these things have been done at epic scale by Russia in Ukraine. Now, something else, which is part of the story, is the fact that those 80 years we were still at a standoff with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and China were perpetrating crimes against their own people, which were significant, massive, historic. And the United States and our allies kept that at bay because we were unified. We believed that there was a set of core democratic values that we held to. What you see right now on the part of the woke right and many confused people in Washington, D.C., is disparaging the idea that we have a historical, ethical, and legal unity with our European allies. It doesn't mean we have to be unified on everything. We can have lots of differences, but there were core values that emerged out of World War II, which bound us together. And Jake, that means you and I can get on a plane, we can go to Greenland, we can go to Paris, we can go pretty much wherever we want. There's freedom. We can enjoy a familiarity and a comfort with people in all different parts of the world that are part of our universe in the post-World War II era, which emphatically is not the case when Russia puts her hand on other countries. That's over. Freedom is over. So something very poisonous and very toxic has taken place. And I do believe that the rewriting of the Second World War is simply catastrophic. And you asked, one other thing you asked, I should address this as well. Yes, it's a problem that when the last generation dies out, if we don't hear their stories, if we don't hear their experiences, if we don't listen to them, it's more distant to us. It isn't real. It's why when you go to Ukraine, there are still people who were alive as little babies during the Holodomor. But there's an entire nation of people that lived under the Soviet Union. They will never forget because it's experiential to them. I sat down, Jake, with a friend of mine whose name is Marisha. She's an international runway model. Her father was killed on day one of the invasion. She left being an international runway model because the Russians were dominating the industry and were making it very difficult for her. And I asked her one day in an interview, I said, well, what is your mission going to be in life? And she said, one of my most important missions is to make sure every one of my children and every person I know will never forget what has happened right now for the next 100 years. And when we forget, we repeat with a vengeance.
So there was tyranny under the Nazis and fascism, tyranny under the Soviets and communism, both strains of authoritarianism. My question to you is, I understand your arguments. We're on the same side here. Well, why is it that Republicans in Congress who understand history, who know the lessons of World War II, people like Brian Fitzpatrick or Michael McCowell, I mean, I think you even previously talked about Dave Crenshaw. There are lots of Republicans in Congress, both senators and reps, who want to support Ukraine, want to oppose Russia. They're screaming probably internally that this is immoral to just stand by and do nothing.
Yeah.
And yet for now, 9 months, that's what they've been doing. They all participated in blocking additional military aid when Biden was still president. This was early 2024, leading up to the election, because Trump said, don't vote for anything. Then eventually that blockage was broken, but Trump won the election, and for 9 months, it's been nothing. Donald Trump has been an impediment towards the allies, as well as it's extremely aggravating reading the headlines and having, as an American, to explain to my mostly non-American audience. The majority of my viewers are not from the United States, and it's just mortifying to me every day having to say what Trump did. For example, this week, lifting sanctions on Belarus's airline. This is now a backdoor for Russian sanctions. Russia can now get parts and materials for their commercial airlines, as well as their military planes. A lot of these parts are dual purpose, both for civilian and Russian military aircraft. And Donald Trump just lifted these sanctions on Belarus to help Putin and the Russians. So my question is, why are pro-Ukraine Republicans staying silent? Why are they continuing to allow this to happen?
This is a $1 million question. It's really important. At the last D-Day, not this year, but the year before, for the 80th, my daughter jumps out of World War II airplanes. She's a parachutist, and she works with World War II vets. And I went to film her. Two of my daughters jump, and I went to film them both. And jumping with them that day was Dan Crenshaw and several other Republican veterans who were celebrating World War II. And I ran to them to interview them when they hit the ground. So I interviewed Crenshaw. I asked him this exact question. And Crenshaw was very eloquent. He talked about the importance of the World War II legacy. He talked about why we need to support Ukraine. He talked about all of these different things. This was before President Trump became president. And I was impressed with what he said. I was grateful for it. Fast forward to where we are today. And I guess I would say that I'm not referring to any one person, but I'm just saying there's been a collective lobotomy. A lobotomy. Something has happened within the Republican Party where, with the rare exception of somebody like Rand Paul, who will stand out and say, hey, we shouldn't be doing this because this is tariffs or taxes, they're unconstitutional. You may not like Rand Paul, but he's one of the few guys that will occasionally say things in opposition to what the president is doing. But there is this attitude that if we don't stand with President Trump, he's going to beat us to a pulp. Or we're going to have something's going to happen to us, or we have to do this because we have to have unity. And let's keep in mind that The majority in both the House and the Senate is hanging by a thread and will probably be lost in 2026. So they're holding on and they're just going with whatever the president said. The bigger problem, even bigger than Ukraine, Ukraine is a symptom of something far darker, and that is the abdication of the Republican Party to their duties as members of Congress to maintain separation of powers. Our framers never intended for rule by executive order. That was never the intention under the Constitution. They never intended for so much power to be aggrandized and accumulated in one person. How does Trump get away with it? The Republicans are letting him get away with it. Why are they doing that? Well, I'm guessing now, but I think it's fear. I think it's concern over the small margin that they have there. I think it's a lack of courage. I think it speaks very poorly of their character, honestly, that they're not willing to speak up and say and do what's right. If ever there was a time, even if you're supportive of President Trump on many things, I cannot believe that these Republicans who once voted for Ronald Reagan and the Republicans who once called for limited government can say absolutely nothing as we're seeing an expansion of executive powers unprecedented in U.S. history.
I gave you that leading question when I already know the answer, but the answer is that Donald Trump has done something that no political leader has ever done, where he interferes with the primary process of incumbents within his own party. So if you don't vote the way Trump wants, if you don't support him enthusiastically, he shows up in your state and then endorses a primary opponent to have you leave the party. So over the last 10 years, he has purged dozens of people who have told him no. This is Bob Corker, Jeff Flake, Mitt Romney, Adam Kinzinger. You can even say Paul Ryan stepped down, and even John Boehner stepped down because they didn't full-throatedly endorse and enthusiastically cheer everything Donald Trump says and did. So there is no independent thinking.
You're saying it's fear of retribution.
Exactly. The best thing they can do is just resign. And there have been, I remember there was a rep in Wisconsin, Gallagher, and he just said, I'm over this. I don't want to be part of this, theatrics and praising the dear leader, North Korea style stuff. So he just resigned early. And I think there's already like 30 Republicans who have announced they're retiring. They're not even going to run for re-election because they just don't want to do this anymore. They don't want to dedicate their lives to praising a dictator who is, it's never enough. The ass kissing that Trump demands from his own party is never enough for him. So if
we were to look at one individual and say who is the greatest representation, this is my opinion now, of the problem that you are describing, I actually think it's Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio, once upon a time, was an advocate for the very things that he's fighting against today. And he has so wholeheartedly made himself the facilitator of a process of things we thought he was against. Many of us thought he was against it. Some of us had hope that Rubio would be a balancing point in the Trump administration, where he has actually aggressively advanced the worst foreign policy agenda items, and he served as a shill for things which are not American, not constitutional, not freedom-oriented, and certainly not pro-Ukraine. And this trend, Jake, it's hard to watch this. I love my country. I am a big fan of my country, and this breaks my heart.
Rubio is the son of Cuban refugees, and right now we are seeing Trump rolling back special refugee status for Cuban immigrants. Because Cubans fleeing Cuba were fleeing communism, they were always given preferential or elevated refugee status to resettle in Florida. And under Marco Rubio and Donald Trump, that has been rolled back. That has been rejected. So it's Marco Rubio, I think, might be the most successful ladder puller of all time, pulling up the ladder behind him when he benefited from protected refugee status, fleeing Cuba for his parents. But I'm going to give you my answer. I've explained this to my audience in a Q&A, because like in my main videos, I don't get to discuss in detail things like this. But when I get into my Q&A videos and people really press me for what I think, it's obvious. From the dead eyes and blank stare of Marco Rubio, he is just waiting for Donald Trump to die of natural causes. The second Trump's heartbeat stops, then he becomes the heir apparent. Him and J.D. Vance are like the top two contenders to be the nominee in 2028. And Marco Rubio, I think, is the poster child. He is the perfect example of selling your soul for power. He has abandoned all of his beliefs, all of his principles, and as long as Donald Trump remains alive, he is going to say and do whatever Donald Trump wants, because he thinks, in a way, he is preserving conservatism and the Republican Party if he can bring it back once Trump has a stroke or a heart attack or something. I don't think that's going to work. I think Trump has created this beast that Marco Rubio will never be embraced by. He will never be the nominee because despite what he accomplishes under Trump these 3 years or whatever, you can just pull up clips of him making fun of Trump's hand size from 2016 and he's done. His kids are never going to endorse him.
Jake, if for our listeners that may be interested, if you go to the Kyiv Post and you look my name up, DW Phillips, I have an article basically saying what you've just said, which is about the decline of Marco Rubio. It's actually an open letter to Marco Rubio. One of the great moments of the last couple of years was Marco Rubio describing in emphatic detail what a war criminal Putin was. That was back when he was a senator. One of the great descents into compromise and dishonesty was Marco Rubio standing before that same Senate committee and telling senators, well, I can't describe President Putin as a war criminal. I'm not willing to do that. I'm not going to talk about it. And the only thing that did changed was that Putin had escalated his crimes, and now Rubio was Secretary of State and Donald Trump was president. So I think the world looks at America and they laugh at us. They see an American which is projecting weakness. For all of the chest puffing and chest beating that comes out of the White House, we appear to be slaves to Putin. We appear to be very strong, self-proclaimed strong, when we're attacking vessels in the Caribbean with 3 people on it, no defense systems, but unwilling to stand up against the great crises of our day and of our moment. Which brings me back to our subject of Kyiv of Mine, which is Americans are sometimes get so caught up in the politics and the day-to-day crises and the nonsense which is coming out of the White House that they've lost this sort of 30,000-foot perspective on what in the world is this really about? Is this just some political discussion? Is just this some war over there? And our film series says, no, it's not. We're dealing with souls and hearts and children and families. And we're dealing with people that are very much our brothers and sisters philosophically. Culturally, even though Ukraine is different than the West, they have actually embraced so many of the ideals and values which makes the West the West. Here's the difference. They are modeling the spirit of liberty which once embodied America in 1776. They are embodying the give me liberty or give me death attitude, which Americans once believed. That's Ukraine. They're the ones that are modeling that for the world now. So in our series, Kyiv of Mine, we bring you right in to the real stories of these people, where this is their heart and this is their vision. And now all of a sudden you start realizing they're just like me. In fact, they're like the America that I was taught about when I was a little boy or a little girl in school.
I openly refer to President Zelensky as the leader of the free world. Donald Trump is not the leader of the free world when he looks in envy at China's military parades and says that he wrote love letters to Kim Jong-un and he really respects Putin. Like Trump, he's not a Democrat. He doesn't believe in democracy. He doesn't care about human rights. He just believes in wealth and power. And the only thing that matters is how big and powerful is your military. You said that the United States is projecting weakness, but that's all they can do with what they're trying to accomplish. Trump is this is the end of globalization. Trump is trying to disentangle the United States economic system with tariffs and their military by retreating back to the North American continent. So how can you go from America being a true superpower, a global power, to just a regional North American hegemon? That has to look weak relative to what we were even 4 years ago. So, okay, we're 2 Americans. I think we've made our position on America well known. let's talk about Europe and what's been going on with their politics. We have successfully dodged some bullets, both in elections in France, elections in Romania, elections in Germany, but we've come up short in Slovakia, Hungary, and I guess the Czech Republic is about to fall to a far-right government. And then we've got this new president in Poland. So can you, you've spent more time in Europe, can you talk to me and help me better understand why is this difficult for Europe? If you want to say that what's going on in Ukraine is far away from America, so Americans don't have to pay attention or care, okay, there's an argument there. But for people living on the European continent, how can they possibly be voting for pro-Russian or Russian sympathetic political leaders?
It's a great question. I was on set for some time. Actually, I was on set right after October 7th took place in Budapest for the filming of a television series. And I was speaking with Hungarians about their Prime Minister Orban. And something to remember when we're dealing with a lot of these European countries is you can win leadership with 23% of the vote. You can win with a fraction of the vote, a smaller percentage of the vote because you've got multiple parties involved. And these individuals are appealing to a much more radicalized group within the culture. All of these cultures have elements that are identifying at some level or another with sort of the Trumpian vision. They're looking to America. They're seeing that. But you're asking a question, how can they do this in their interest? And the answer is they're self-destructing. I mentioned I was at a D-Day celebration. I was there with a bunch of Slovakians. And I said, what do you think about your leader? Fico, of course, comes from Marxist-Leninist backgrounds. He started off his life as a Marxist-Leninist Communist Party member. That's where Fico came from. And he is a complete Russian sympathetic, in the pocket of Russia leader. His presence in NATO is destructive. And if I could just throw this in, Jake, I think when President Trump threw the gauntlet down last week and said, I'm not going to do anything until all of Europe withdraws all of their oil from Russia, which we would like them to do. Yes, we want them to do that. But he knows full well that Fico and Orban will never do that in 10 million years, meaning nothing will ever come.
Not just European, all NATO countries, meaning Turkey and Erdogan, also have to do it.
In other words, it was a poison pill. It literally means I never have to do anything. This is my get out of responsibility free card. But back to your question. What happened in Poland? Actually, it was a bit disturbing what happened in Poland. We do a lot of work in Poland, and it was a bit of a surprise. The Polish people do not like Russians. They are aware of what Russian can do. And Hungary and Slovakia, where they're so tied into Russian oil, where their leaders are in the pocket of Moscow, it's a little bit less clear. But I would say that there are still a majority of people there who recognize the problem and who support Ukraine. These European nations, though, also have war fatigue. They're tired. They're tired of talking about Ukraine, and their leaders don't help. I wish I had a better answer for why it's happening, but it has to stop or Europe is going to go up in flames.
My answer is corruption, money.
Sure.
Viktor Orban,
well, sure.
I've seen the drone video of his father's estate or whatever, and he's like building, the equivalent to the Palace of Versailles. When Yanukovych was overthrown, I saw those videos in 2014 of ordinary Ukrainians going through his menagerie, all of these goofy dictators, they all do the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And once they get the money from the Kremlin, they start buying zoo animals and fancy cars and really weird stuff because these people are all insane.
Orban, I think, has more support in the United States than he has in his own country. He's in power right now, but it's because of President Trump and also because of woke right media that Orban has been celebrated as a hero. That reflects back on him in Hungary. It helps him out there, but I don't think I don't think any of these men are here for long. I think there will be a comeuppance soon, and I think we're going to see a bit of a comeuppance at the end of 2026 here in America. But I don't think it can persist. But you're right. Corruption is always at the heart of all of it.
Well, the money has to stop. The Kremlin has to run out of money. And once they stop paying these people, my biggest example is Transnistria. Transnistria only exists because Russia sends them money. The second, because these are local Moldovans in the Russian military garrisoning this territory. But if they stop being paid, they'll lay down their arms and Transnistria will be reunited with Moldova. Once their territorial dispute is resolved, Moldova can then join the European Union and be as prosperous as Romania is. Like, there should be no difference between the standard of living and economic prosperity of Romania and Moldova. But the difference is Kremlin money, making sure that the conflict remains so that the people can never unify. We're coming up on almost an hour here, DW. What are your closing thoughts for my audience? There's probably been a couple 100,000 people who have been watching me and sticking with me, supporting Ukraine now for over 3 years. But you're right, it's fatigue. It's been a long war. But what do you want to communicate to people who, after all this time, are sticking with the cause and still supporting Ukraine?
3 things. The first is this. Every generation has its defining battle, its defining crisis. Ours is what's taking place in Ukraine right now. You may feel that it's far away. You may feel that it's somehow detached from the price of eggs or gas in the United States. But the reality is that everything that we take for granted, do contracts work? Can I travel? Do my children have a hope to study abroad if they want to? Can I be at peace with my neighbors? Hangs on whether or not we maintain this post-World War II law order, which is rooted in transcendent concepts of freedom, which were in fact embraced by our own founding fathers here in the United States of America. Putin has a very different vision. His vision is totalitarian. It is brutalitarian. It is criminal at the most basic level. And if you ever looked in the eye any of the victims of Putin, you would not be able to think straight again if you really saw what he was doing there. It is utterly transformative. The nature of the evil is beyond anything at this scale that we've seen from a sovereign nation before. When we fight for Ukraine, we're fighting for America. We're fighting for your children. We're fighting for the future of the world. And that brings me to my second point. What do you do about it? Well, there's been a lot of talk here. And of course, Jake is phenomenal at discussing the political and the tactical and all of that that's taking place. I want to talk about personal things you can do. We need to let other Americans embrace the spirit of liberty in Ukraine. We need them to see the heart and soul of people who are our brothers and our sisters. And the way we can do that, if we can't all go to Ukraine, is to watch movies, is to listen to the stories. That's why we did Kyiv of Mine. We put Kyiv of Mine because America needs a love letter about the people of Ukraine, because we need more love in our heart. It sounds silly. Love is really a big part of the answer. And we really do need to love those who are oppressed. We need to love the orphans. We need to love those who are suffering. We need to love a nation which has sacrificed so much, not just for them, but for us. There was never a chance under Biden or under Trump that American soldiers were going to be fighting over in Ukraine. No, Ukrainians are fighting in Ukraine. And they're fighting in Ukraine so you don't have to fight in Europe later or here in America. I think you need to know who these people are. I'd say pick up our story, Kyiv of Mine. Watch it, pass it around to other people, give it to people. I would also say, Jake, that people need to take your specialty episodes where you deal with specific issues. And everybody says, oh, Maidan was a CIA plot, or this happened, or that happened. There are answers to that, more than these little simple Russian propaganda points which are constantly put out there. But in the end, I think people are won, not just intellectually, but emotionally. They need to feel invested. They need to have heart. And that's something we're trying to do with our storytelling. This war will be won on the battlefield, but it also has to be won in the information war. And storytelling is one part of the information war. That's why we made Kyiv of Mine.
Thank you so much for your time and expertise, DW. I really appreciated talking to you, and hopefully at some point in the future, we'll see you again.
Thank you so much, Jake. Blessings to you and your excellent show.